In terms of the labour strikes, then, what does it mean, the relationship between government and trade unions, particularly as the Congress of South African Trade Unions backing brought Jacob Zuma into power?
Well, certainly, I mean, this is a reflection of the policy contestation. It is also the normal, as I say, course of routines in the way in which employers are going to bargain with their employees. In this case, it's the state, with people who view themselves both as citizens as well as workers, trying to bargain a equitable regime, so to speak, in the relationship between employer and employee. But whether this means that political support for Jacob Zuma is waning is not, I don't think, is clear, because the political support that Jacob Zuma enjoys within both the ANC as well as the alliance structures is still fairly high. But this is one of the pressuring or accountability mechanisms that the unions are going to use to extract the kind of space A that was assumed would be delivered. Secondly, it is the contestation for their ability to define policy more concretely within the alliance. And I think that's important because COSATU is soon to have, later this year, its annual congress, at which they will take certain policy decisions in terms of resolutions. And I'm sure that they would want those resolutions to be adopted very soon, at least in part, by the African National Congress. And so this is the beginning of that kind of show of force for bargaining greater amount of space. Whether this means that the political support that Jacob Zuma enjoys is at peril is not the case. But it certainly is a very clear signal that if there's no real delivery seen to be done to COSATU, particularly on their ability to shape policy within the ANC and therefore within the state, it means that clearly if those elements are not seen to be delivered on, that they will use their power to organize within the alliance as they did previously to get Thabo Mbeki out. So I think the indications are clear, and the indications clearly politically within the ANC, particularly in which senior leaders who both in the ANC and government have gone out to respond to what's going on, both in terms of the strike and the community protests, is a healthy signal for responsiveness. But as I said earlier, whether it's going to address the state capacity dimensions required to address all of this is a different question.
Could this discontent possibly indicate a power struggle within the trade unions with the upcoming Congress, such as, for instance, an attempt to put pressure on those who supported Zuma, or is COSATU still a united force?
Well, I don't think in South Africa at any moment since our transition that the manufactured consensus that drove unity and cohesion pre the transition is as solid, as cohesive and as homogeneous as we assumed it to have been. So this is about the fracturing of different interests and interest groups within the broad alliance. The ANC's beauty thus far has been is that it's been able to contain all these different ideological, political and policy differences within the broad thrust for transforming the nature of the society. But the limits of that transition and the limits of those transformation has actually been reached. And so the difficulty now for the ANC to contain all of this within the broad alliance movement is going to prove increasingly difficult. Now, whether this is true for the internal dynamics within COSATU is entirely different, because while it seems as if COSATU is a homogeneous bloc with a set of common and cohesive policy positions across all its different constituent unions, is not in fact the case. There's obviously some unions who take different policy stances on different issues. Sometimes it's about the actual policy content on which they differ. Sometimes it's the process by which they should actually reach those policy formulations. For instance, let's take the national health insurance. There's broad support for the idea of a national health insurance, but different constituent unions within COSATU would like the national health insurance to work and function in different ways. Clearly because some of the affiliates and members of those unions which are affiliated to COSATU have very good medical aids, have medical aids which benefit them as workers, and so for them to have to forego some of those privileges is not in the same level of interest as it might be for other workers also affiliated through COSATU unions who might not want the same thing, as opposed to those people who at least have some support, who have a modicum of social or health insurance in that respect, would differ very markedly from what ordinary citizens, particularly those who are not employed or the unemployed, the unorganized sectors would want. So the difficulty here is going to be what is good for us as workers, but what is going to be good for society as a whole. So those tensions, as an example, manifest across a whole broad range of policy issues within COSATU. Whether there's a political fallout within COSATU is not entirely clear, and I'm not sure that that is indeed the case. Politically, there is a greater amount of cohesion, but the limits of that political cohesion will also soon at some point be reached, because simply interest in a society, once you reach a particular historical stage of development, social and economic development, different interests begin to take root, and those interests will organize to pursue what is in their own best interests. At the moment, of course, the political interests all coincide. And so that broad support for COSATU positions generally is still fairly sound. I'm not sure that what is going on in COSATU in terms of this policy contestation and political contestation is about purges, for instance. Some people might assume that this is payback time, that there is a difference of opinion of those who broadly supported Jacob Zuma for the presidency of the ANC and those who didn't, those who wanted to adopt a different approach, whether they are now contesting within COSATU for the dominance to determine how COSATU is going to relate to the ANC. That, I think, is not going on. But policy contestation certainly is. There would be a modicum of political contestation, but generally COSATU is homogeneous. Whether this means that they will simply withdraw their support as a whole for the broad trajectory that the ANC has decided, that, of course, is not going to happen, not yet at least, but over time it will. And we've seen that happen with the formation of COPE, where a set of political interests decided that the ANC was not serving what they believed to have been in the broad social interest, and so they went and organized differently. But clearly doesn't seem to have succeeded as well as people assumed it would have. And this is the fundamental lesson why political contestation, ideological contestation and policy contestation still continues to go on within the broad ANC alliance rather than outside of it.